Nigeria's headline inflation rate rose to 34.6% in November 2024, up from 33.88% in October, marking the third consecutive month of rising inflation, according to data released by the National Statistics Agency. Month on month, the inflation rate stood at 2.64%, underscoring ongoing price surges across goods and services. After easing briefly in July and August, inflation resumed its upward trajectory in September, driven by the lingering effects of the naira devaluation and successive petrol price hikes. These factors have intensified the country's worst cost of living crisis in decades. Now, in response, the Central Bank of Nigeria has implemented 6 interest rate hikes this year, totaling 875 basis points in a bid to rein in inflationary pressures. Now, to help us make sense of this, we're joined by Research and Insights Associate Norrenberger, Samuel Oyekanmi. Samuel, you're welcome. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for having me.
Good. Now, Samuel, what are the key drivers behind the persistent rise in Nigeria's inflation rates that we are experiencing, and how do structural issues in the economy exacerbate these pressures?
I think the factors impacting inflation in Nigeria still remains the same. Of course, you want to go back to about over a year ago when the federal government removed fuel subsidy, and how the price of fuel has pretty much increased such since then, affecting cost of transportation and also having some form of a multi-faceted effect on several other commodities, one of which is also food. So energy has gone up, impacting core inflation. Food inflation has its own seasonal effect, and then there's also the impact of energy prices affecting food prices. So you've seen pretty much both sides of the inflation basket, or the two components of inflation, increasing same way. And food inflation, of course, because you have many other factors contributing to that, is growing at a much faster rate compared to core inflation. And then it's just an unfortunate situation, but that's where we are. Policy and then structural issues all combining to exacerbate what we see right now as inflation. And in terms of structural issues, we want to talk about the fact that, particularly when it comes to food inflation, when you talk to farmers, you see you have a glean of some of the factors impacting food supply in the country, one of which includes access to seedling, fertilizers, the movement of food produce from farm to the market. It could also be as a result of storage facilities, bad road, and so on and so forth. Pretty much, it's really a lot. One of them, again, is also insecurity, and it's just quite. It's really a conversation that has happening over the years, and it's not seeming. It doesn't appear like it's changing any bit. At north of 34%, that's really an ugly figure to see at this point in the year.
Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, or is it months ago now, there was plenty hullabaloo about the central bank increasing interest rates. So how effective has that been, the increase of Nigeria's interest rates on curbing inflation, and what other monetary or fiscal measures could complement these efforts?
Yeah, so the CBN increasing interest rates, I think personally that doesn't so much has a significant impact on inflation, because then again, when the CBN tries to or raises interest rate, the idea is to tighten liquidity, reduce money supply. Money supply is at record highs right now. And then you have the situation of the currency in circulation and the currency outside banks. So you have about 92% of the currency in circulation being outside the banking system. As an economist, you want to ask yourself, how then will interest rate hikes have any form of impact on inflation, or at the end of the day on the currency or on money supply? So it's pretty much a tricky question. I don't think it has so much impact on inflation. Yeah, we saw some reversals some months ago, and that for me was as a result of base effect. So we had highs at some point last year, and then when you compare them year on year, you start seeing the numbers not growing at a fast pace as you would. But then a little tweak in some of the factors that contribute to inflation, one of which was the surge in energy prices, and a host of many other things. And then the seasonal effect of food inflation, we went back again to the current levels that we are. We're currently dealing with over 28-year high in terms of headline inflation, and it just speaks to a number of fiscal monetary. Of course, the monetary side is doing its bit, right? But then there's also inflationary policies from the fiscal side of government. So there really needs to be a handshake. As much as the CBN is trying its best, of course, using the tools that we are within its own ambit to fight inflation, the fiscal side really needs to start looking at some of the factors that is driving inflation. So when you look at the numbers from the NBS today, you see that some of the components that recorded significant highs, one of them is imported inflation. So you ask yourself, why Nigeria, that has an agricultural sector that contributes over 20%, and then over 50% of the labor force still has to export so much agricultural produce, and beyond that is also subjected to many of the shocks happening in that market. So there really needs to be a handshake. The government really needs to start finding some of the factors that is contributing to the surge in prices, especially for those imported food items. It could be one of them, again, is the exchange rate issue, where I think the CBN is also doing a lot to manage. So of course, there needs to be a handshake between the monetary side of things and then the fiscal side of things. Fiscal deal with structural issues, insecurity, and most of many other things like tariffs, taxes, and all that.
So let's talk about that handshake now. What measures can be implemented to stabilize, especially food prices, because that's where the common man actually suffers the most. Food prices, and also improve accessibility to these foods for the low-income earners.
Yeah, so of course, if you look at the food side of things, so for me, if you want to solve a problem, you really need to start looking at what are the causes of those problems. So you look at the agricultural value chain, where are those loopholes standing? So first, the farmers do not have access to credit, they don't have access to good fertilizers and seedlings. How can the government come in to be able to ensure that those farmers have access to some of these things that they need as input? And then again, in the process, what's the agricultural system that we adopt in Nigeria? The government and private sector also need to come in play to be able to manage this side of things. Then again, you come to issues of insecurity. Farmers do not have access to their farmlands, because you need to be able to deal with the supply side of things. So you need to be able to deal with insecurity. You also need to be able to ensure that the food that is produced in the farm can easily get to the market. So what are the things that you need to do? Good roads, ensure that there is safety on the road. You also want to find a way to probably suggest or again encourage mechanized farming, either through private-public partnership, for these farmers to have access to the funds that they need. And then again, you look at statistics, you see post-harvest losses that these farmers have to endure as a result of lack of warehousing or storage facilities. How can the government, of course, I don't think the government can do it alone, but how can the government incentivize private players to come into these respective areas of the agricultural value chain in order to ensure that food is sufficient? Because if we are able to solve that, I think we will find enough to be able to feed the nation and then even export, and then some FX inflows. But that's my take from the fiscal side.
Well, Samuel, your take was good enough because you took the question right out of my mouth. But thank you very much for giving us your expert opinion about the situation. Thank you.